Hello everyone and welcome. This video will discuss the relevant lore for our upcoming Heroes and Hardship game set in the First Age of Middle-earth. The game is entitled The First Age, The Doom of Dorthonion. Please realize that this video is very oversimplified. Middle-earth lore can be overwhelming when all you're considering is the Lord of the Rings. When you get into the Silmarillion, it's a whole other ballgame, and it's my goal to distill the lore down to something manageable. Something that can be devoured piecemeal and add to the drama and theme of the game. I don't want the lore to be a chore. But where do we start? Well, it may be sacrilege, but we won't start at the beginning. We'll forget thousands of years worth of history, the years of the lamps. In fact, we will come right in at the end of the years of the trees. This is when Feanor, a rather bold and proud elf, but also probably the greatest craftsman to ever exist, makes the Silmarils. The Silmarils were brilliant jewels that contained the light of the trees themselves. That's right, there was no sun or moon yet. That doesn't start until the First Age. The world was illumined by two majestic trees. Anyhow, the Silmarils were eventually coveted because Melkor, later known as Morgoth, who is also the big bad of the Silmarillion, with the help of Ungoliant, who's a giant spider-like being, steals the Silmarils and destroys the two trees. This plunges the world into night. There are just stars above, and the Silmarils are the only thing that contain the light of that age. That's why they're so coveted. So their maker, Feanor, was obviously furious. He chased Melkor to Middle-earth, but the gods, aka the Valar, did not want him to. In the end, he took ships by force and participated in what's called the First Kinslaying. After that, the House of Feanor was cursed, and so he went to Middle-earth in pursuit of Melkor and the Silmarils, despite the wishes of the Valar. Unfortunately, Feanor betrayed many others of his kin, namely Fingolfin. Fingolfin is a big one. He's a half-brother to Feanor, and Fingolfin is still alive at the beginning of your game when it starts. Feanor, unfortunately, was killed by a Balrog named Gothmog when they tried to assault Melkor. Now he's known as Morgoth. It is around this time that the sun and moon rises for the first time, and we enter the First Age proper. About 60 years passed, and the Noldor, that's another aim to the elves we've been talking about, well, they get settled. They also come into contact with someone called King Thingol. King Thingol is what's called a Grey Elf. He ruled a vast kingdom in Middle-earth already. Long, long ago, he was from a line of elves that never went to Valinor to begin with. So there's that distinction. Thingol really isn't of the same line as Feanor, Fingolfin, and all those Noldor elves that have names that sound familiar or similar. They all sound similar, Fingolfin, Feanor. But I digress. About 60 years after the sun and moon rise, all the elves band together and they successfully besiege Morgoth's stronghold in Angband. And that is a good thing, because that siege lasts for around 400 years. And that's another big chunk of time that we'll kind of fast forward through until our game starts. So now is a good time to go over some geography and where all the different elves settled and ruled. Part 2, Genealogy and Geography of Northern Belarian. Before we can discuss geography and the migration of the Noldor, we have to discuss the genealogy. Again, I'm going to simplify it down to the major players. I'll tell you where they settled and ruled. First, we'll talk about Fingolfin. He was the High King of the Noldor at this point. He and one of his sons, Fingon, dwelt in Barad Eithel, aka the Tower of the Well. Barad Eithel was situated in the Arid Wethrin, or Mountains of Shadow, which was west of Morgoth's besieged fortress. This mountain fortress served as the high king's seat for a very long time. Finrod, a nephew of Fingolfin, and Orodreth, who was Finrod's nephew, held a fortress known as Minas Tirith. This is different from the Third Age city from Lord of the Rings. Minas Tirith was located in the pass of Sirion. During the siege of Angband, this fortress stopped Morgoth from sending any sorties into more southern Beleriand. And Beleriand, by the way, is really just the Middle Earth of the First Age. Next, we have Angrod and Agnor. These are your lords in the game. They are also nephews of Fingolfin, and they ruled Dorthonion. Dorthonion was a forested, beautiful highland that spanned about 60 leagues from west to east. And Dorthonion itself was walled in by the encircling mountains in the west and arid Gorgoroth in the south. Last but not least was Turgon. Turgon was Fingolfin's second son, and he went on to found the legendary city fortress of Gondolin. Gondolin is awesome in Morgoth for a very, very long time. Gondolin was also hidden by the encircling mountains and guarded from trespassers by great eagles. Now for the pesky sons of Fëanor. Fëanor had 7 sons. They looked over the areas east of Dorthonion. The sons of Fëanor that participated in the siege are Celegorm, Curufin, Maedhros, Maglor, and Caranthir. The last 2 sons, which were twins, were named Amros and Amros. They were great hunters and don't enter into the stories as much. So now you have lots of names of Noldor elves. I think of them thus. First, Fingolfin's family. They hold western northern Beleriand during the siege. Then you have Fëanor's family. They hold eastern northern Beleriand. Try as you may, you probably won't memorize the names unless you tie them to geography. So watch the video again if you need help. Though the Silmarillion focuses greatly on the history of the elves, it's certainly not complete without mentioning the race of men. Another word for men, by the way, or humans, is the Edain. After all, the Edain, their deeds, both heroic and treacherous, help shape the Middle Earth that we know and love from the Lord of the Rings. But let's back it up a minute. Let's back it up to the time of the Siege of Angband. During that time, as you'll remember, Fingolfin's family, otherwise known as the House of Finarfin, and Fëanor's sons hold Morgoth at bay. Around 300 years into that siege entered men into the picture who wandered over from the far east of Middle-earth. So this will only be about 150 years before we start our game. The first of these houses is the House of Bayor. This one is super important. This bloodline eventually, far, far down the road, after merging with a second house of men, gives birth to such heroes as Elendil, Isildur, and even Aragorn. Yes, that Aragorn, Strider. But in the First Age, it's important to know the following. First, they were the OG humans to come into Beleriand. They were discovered by Finrod and eventually settled into Dorthonion. They were gifted a particular region of Dorthonion named Ledros. During the time of the game, the lord of the House of Bayor is a man named Bregulas. His brother is Barahir. Barahir's son is Beren, and this is the same Beren of the Beren and Luthien fame. Beren and Luthien's offspring eventually marry into another house, the House of Heidor. Now, the House of Heidor settled in arid Wethrin, the Mountains of Shadow, and eventually a place called Dor Lomin. They were loyal to Fingolfin. While the House of Bayor was stout and dark and closely resembled the Noldor themselves, the men of the House of Heidor were tall and blond and resembled the elves that dwelt in Valinor, far to the west across the sea. The House of Heidor during the time of our game, includes such characters as Huron and Huor, but they're very young. The very last house of men, last house of the Edain, was the House of Haleth. They were dark-haired, but not as large in stature as the House of Bayor. Though some of their line mingled with the House of Heidor, they were all but wiped out at the end of the First Age of Middle-earth. Most of their time was spent in the forest of Brethil, which was technically part of Doriath. Do you remember Thingol? Well, Doriath was his kingdom, and it was hemmed in and protected by the magic of his wife, Melian, who just so happened to be a Maiar, or kind of god/angel being in the world of Tolkien. All right, so there you have it, the three houses of the Edain in the First Age.